Hi, I'm Hillary Wynn, Custom Content Manager for Meister Media Worldwide, the publisher of Crop Life magazine. I'd like to welcome Dr. Alan Blaylock, Senior Agronomist at Nutrien. Dr. Blaylock is going to answer some questions about the role nutrient removal plays in crop production. But first, a little bit about Dr. Blaylock. Based in Colorado, he brings extensive North American and international experience in nutrient management to the Nutrien agronomy team. Dr. Blaylock has a wealth of experience in applying science-based nutrient management principles and products to solving practical questions. Dr. Blaylock, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to our audience, our various listeners, and about these important topics and maybe how we can offer some help.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive in. What's the difference between nutrient uptake and nutrient removal?
So nutrient removal, it refers to the portion of nutrients that we remove from the field in the harvested part of the crop, where uptake is the total the plant is taking up over the growing season. A great way to describe that would be take a grain, a corn or wheat. The nutrients contained in the total plant would be uptake. The nutrients removed would be what's contained in the grain that's hauled away. So there's an important difference there in its impact.
Where can farmers and their advisors find accurate nutrient removal data?
There are quite a few sources for nutrient removal data, but we like our own calculator that we have on our economics website, nutrien-economics.com. And that is derived from university studies and peer-reviewed references, particularly databases from institutes like the International Plant Nutrition Institute and TFI and other reputable sources, some Canadian research. And so we've tried to assemble this calculator based on those reputable sources so we get the most accurate information.
Sounds like a handy tool for growers to use.
Yeah, it's a great tool in estimating impact of harvest and how much they're taking off when they harvest the crop.
Where does soil testing fit into the equation, and how should soil testing data be used in conjunction with removal data?
So soil testing is a really important piece of information we can gather about our farms and our fields. And that's telling us something about the nutrients that the soil can supply. And it's not always the exact amount that the soil will supply, but something that relates to how the crop is going to respond to that level in the field. So that's kind of a baseline that we use to establish our nutrient management programs and how much we need to apply. And we're going to talk, I think, about how that fits with nutrient removal. But I always like to tell growers, look, start with your soil test. That's the starting point for developing these recommendations. You may make modifications to what comes out of that, but that's where you need to start.
And then how should that data be used in conjunction with removal data?
So what crop removal data is telling us is the impact of nutrient harvest, as it were, by the crop on what's happening in the soil. Now, we may not always see that nutrient removal reflected immediately. It may take time over several years of nutrient removal to see changes in the soil test, because soils are what we call buffered. They're kind of resistant to change. They have these reserves that come into play. How nutrient removal helps me in evaluating soil test is when we have maybe big changes in my cropping system. Let's take this year, for example. We have a pretty big corn crop sitting out there in the field this year across the Corn Belt. If I'm harvesting a bigger crop than I've planned for, I may remove more nutrients than I've actually anticipated. Now, the soil is able to supply that balance in most cases. But if I'm harvesting that big crop maybe several years in a row, I may see faster drawdown, and I may want to consider looking at a replacement kind of strategy when I have those big crops. On the other hand, let's say I have a small crop. I've had drought, or in some parts of the Midwest this year, we had some flooding, and maybe they didn't even get a crop. Well, or a very small crop. So in those cases, where we harvest a smaller crop, maybe we haven't removed as much. And so we can consider that in relation to the soil test and think about directionally which direction that soil test is heading. Now, if I've done a good job of maintaining soil fertility, not excessive levels, but maintaining adequate soil test levels, this crop nutrient removal figure may not make much difference in my soil test. But some people like to use a maintenance and build up kind of strategy, and they then rely on nutrient removal as their indicator. And so that strategy is attempting not necessarily to respond to that soil test level, but looking at the crop and trying to maintain a budget of removed and what's applied. So kind of keeping those in balance every year based on what I've harvested and how much I've removed. So a couple of different strategies. They can overlap. They can be used in conjunction with each other, or they can be used separately. Sometimes it's specific to certain nutrients. Sometimes one is more relevant to a farmer's ownership situation or leasing situation than another. But those are kind of two different strategies for looking at nutrient management.
Speaking of harvest, how does harvest and nutrient removal impact fertilizer purchasing decisions for the following year?
So, as I mentioned, if we have a much greater or much lesser crop than we've anticipated, we may make adjustments in the amount of fertilizer we expect to purchase. And this year, with those areas that have a really big corn crop, they may consider increasing their nutrient budget just a bit to replace that, particularly if they're looking at this replacement kind of strategy and anticipating, boy, I may have more drawdown of the soil reserves than I expected. And I really want to try to maintain that good soil fertility level. So it may mean that I have to add a bit more to my budget. Or the opposite could be true. And it may mean that if I didn't harvest as much of a crop, those reserves are still there. And maybe I don't need as much fertilizer for the coming season because I haven't used as much from that soil bank.
Is there anything else our audience should know?
Well, again, I think I'd like to remind farmers, look, we start with the soil test. We really want to know what's in the soil. So consider that a key piece of information. You don't necessarily need the soil test every year, but for P and K and pH, good schedule is about every third year, sometimes every fourth year. But unless we've had some of these bigger changes, then we may want to soil test more frequently. The other thing I'd like to remind growers of is that there is value in maintaining adequate soil test levels. When we maintain a good soil fertility level, we have more flexibility to adjust our nutrient applications based on cash flow. If I have a good soil fertility level and I have good reserves of nutrients in the soil, and I don't have the cash coming in. We all know what this year looks like. Low prices. We have a good crop, but prices aren't good. And for those who maybe didn't have a good crop and have low prices, and they're looking at how do I manage this budget? So there may be opportunities to apply a little bit less of some of these nutrients if I have good soil fertility. But if I've not been maintaining good soil fertility, that deficiency of nutrients has a direct impact on my yield, and that yield is a big component of the profit equation. So there is value in maintaining good soil fertility. It gives us flexibility to adjust our management strategies for cash flow and yield and weather situations. So just like to remind farmers of the importance of soil fertility in that profit equation. It's something over which the farmers have some control. So they certainly can manage around that, and it's a big influence on their profit.
And where can more information about nutrient removal be found?
We have a lot of information on our website, nutrien-economics with a K.com. In addition to the calculator we mentioned, there are lots of articles about nutrient management, various strategies that a grower might implement, information on specific nutrients and how they behave, how the crop responds to them, and management tips such as placement, timing, rates, and those kinds of things. So we have a wealth of agronomic information there on nutrient management that our listeners may find helpful.
Dr. Blaylock, thanks again for taking the time to discuss how nutrient removal impacts crop production.
My pleasure to be here.